Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is what I refer to as my outdoor composting bin. And into this bin goes all of the cuttings from my garden whenever I'm pruning, all my kitchen scraps that don't end up going into the freezer to be fed to the worms in my wormery, and pretty much anything else that seems like it would probably break down in a bin like this. So it's all fair game as far as I'm concerned. And right now it's the beginning of September, and all summer long this bin has been super busy with activity, constantly breaking down anything I throw at it, rarely ever seeing the level of the bin rise much. It always seems to maintain almost a steady level. And I think the main reason for that is what you see right here. This right here is it's a black soldier fly. It's actually a pretty puny one. Maybe it's just emerged from its cocoon or whatever it is. It you know, after it gets hatched out of its egg, it becomes a little tiny larvae, a little worm-like creature, which is what populates this bin. And they eat and they eat and they eat, they eat like crazy. And at some point that little larvae will start to turn really, really dark in color, and it will stop eating, stop moving, and within its shell it'll turn into one of these little flies right here. And I'm always amazed at how close I can come to one of these things without it taking off. So I bet if I were to simply remove this cardboard and set it aside, that little guy is probably still going to be sitting there even after I go to put the cardboard back on. So I guess we could see what happens after we're finished here. So last time we checked in on this, which was only 5 days ago, we were in here to retrieve worms, because in addition to the black soldier fly larvae that seem to do the majority of the work in here, although I can't say that for sure, there's also a ton of earthworms in here. I'm assuming that they're red wigglers just from their appearance. They're small, they eat like crazy, and they all came into this bin on their own, voluntarily. I didn't put any worms into this bin, but I bet you it's the bin of mine that has the greatest number of worms than any other. So what we did last time, 5 days ago, was we started poking around in here. And if you watch that video, I could always put a link to it up in the corner over here. It was only 5 days ago. The majority of what you saw across the top here was corn husks, which you could see is still present in here in great numbers. And like right here, I believe this might be an example of a black soldier fly, which has already gotten to the point where it's not eating anymore, and it might just be waiting to transform into a fly. Because when they get to a certain age and they get really dark as they grow older, they eventually get to a point where they can sense that they're preparing to transform into a fly, and then they try to get away from the food supply, try to find themselves a nice dry, calm place to start turning into a fly, and then at some point they'll actually emerge as a fly from these I guess they're cocoons, maybe. It's hard to say what they are, but basically that's the skin of the larvae, and then I guess it just becomes the enclosure in which they transform from a worm into an actual fly. So usually when I start poking down into this bin, I almost immediately find myself faced with tons and tons of black soldier fly larvae, and I think we're finally getting to that level where we can see them, and it's always pretty incredible to feel how much heat these little guys generate. I could feel the warmth of this material as I start touching the stuff that they were inhabiting, and you could see them, they're all squirming away from the daylight. You could also see from their color that they're still pretty juvenile, so they got a ways to go before they get to that dark color and they're able to transform into a fly. It's here in the middle that I don't really expect to see a great number of worms, because it is so hot. If you have worms, then you know too that they don't like the extreme heat. If the material that they're inhabiting begins to hot compost. They'll usually want to try to find themselves a cooler place to retreat to. So the worms I usually expect to find out near the outer edges. You can see all kinds of other stuff hanging out in here, crickets, various other tiny composting creatures, all helping with the process. I mean, right here you can also see a black soldier fly larvae, a couple of them, very, very small ones. Here's a slightly larger one. And they do a heck of a job breaking down the food I put in here for them. Like I said earlier, the level of this bin just never seems to drop. So what I did 5 days ago was I came in here and I started scouring the edge, the outer edge of the bin, where I know it's a little bit cooler and more comfortable, where worms might be hanging out. And I did my best to extract as many worms as I could. And that's exactly what I'm going to try to do here today. And whatever worms we're able to collect, we're going to release them into my outdoor worm bin. So let's begin by trying to scoop some out and see what we get. It's hard to tell how many worms might be populating a handful of this material, so I don't feel like I could be very selective. I just have to go on faith that there probably are an adequate number of worms hanging out in the material, that I should just go ahead and take it. But I just can't seem to resist picking through it a little bit just to see if I can get a sense of how many there are in there. So I know that I'm bringing along with it a whole bunch of stuff that appears to be compost, I guess. Partially broken down foods. But I guess for 2 handfuls, it does seem like we've got ourselves a pretty good number of worms, and right away they're retreating away from the daylight. I'm just trying to figure out what kind of worms are these. I'm assuming that they're red wigglers, but if there's something else, I'd be curious to know. So what I did last time too, and we'll do the same now, is we'll just gradually work our way around the bin here and see how much we can collect. And I'm going to just use the container itself as sort of my my threshold for the amount that I'm going to try to pull out of here today. And last time I did this, I kind of made a rough estimate. I assumed that maybe I had transferred about 1,000 worms out of here into my outdoor worm bin. I'm also just trying to see if I can get a sense of how many I'm getting this time too as we go. You can see a lot of peanut shells are in here. And I hope they break down over in the worm bin. They're kind of a tougher material that seems to take a little while to break down, so we'll see how it does in the outdoor worm bin. I suppose this might be a good opportunity to try to pull out any sort of larger items that are in here, clearly not worms, like these little sticks. Maybe I should have started into that earlier, because I'm bringing over all kinds of large bits that I know are not worms. I had almost thought that it might be nice to also try to exclude all these peanut shells, but I'm going to go with it. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But if there's anything else that's fairly large in size, I'm going to try to pull it out here and leave it behind. It'll just give us more room for additional worms. You can see we're getting pretty close to the top of the container though. Oops, I guess that's it for my glove. I thought I heard something snap earlier. Well, it does seem like we may have room for another handful or two, but probably not much more than that. So let's see what we can come up with over here. Here too, it looks like we've got ourselves a pretty good number of worms hanging out. definitely getting close to the top of the container here. I wonder how many I've got so far. Yeah, you can see last time it was mostly corn, and up here on the very top, the most freshly added stuff is cuttings from all my pepper plants. I tried pruning my pepper plants the other day, and that's all the stuff that I took off, all the extra leaves and stuff like that. Starting to think we're getting pretty close to the end here. We're probably not going to have room for much more going forward. But since it seems like every handful seems to bring with it a good plentiful number of worms, who knows, maybe 100 per handful, maybe more. I'm going to guess that we're probably hauling about another 1,000 as a result of this extraction. I just try to estimate nowadays because I've been doing something a little new. Even for this outdoor worm bin, I'm going to be trying to do the same thing, which is trying to estimate the number of worms that I've placed into a bin of mine, even this one right here. So, well, I guess it's more maybe a little bit more interesting to keep track of what's happening in my indoor worm bins. I figured why not try to do the same out here. So when I originally started the outdoor worm bin, or kind of restarted it, it was this looks like it's the end of a microphone jack or something like that. So I'm just gonna try to remove stuff that looks like trash. Yeah, back to the numbers estimate. When I originally started this bin, which was really 4 weeks ago, it wasn't much of a start. It really just consisted of the material that had been in the outdoor worm bin that did not fit through my screen. So it was all the large uncomposted bits that I restored to that container, and there wasn't too much. It may have been about enough to fill this container here, maybe a little bit more. And I imagine that a certain number of straggler worms ended up in that material and went along for the ride. So even though it wasn't much, I did consider that as the relaunch of my outdoor worm bin, which was 4 weeks ago today. And I roughly counted, I just put a really rough guess estimate on how many worms I was launching at that time, and I just estimated that maybe a couple hundred worms went along for the ride and were in there populating that bin. And that bin went for a good 3+ weeks, up until 5 days ago, at which point I did what we're doing here. I decided it was time to try to build up the population in that bin. So I came into here for volunteers, and I boosted the number by what I estimated to be about 1,000 worms last time. Doing exactly what we're doing here is just looking at what we've pulled out and putting a rough estimate on it. I don't remember if anybody kicked in any ideas or any suggestions as to how many worms they thought was extracted last time, but I estimated about 1,000. So in addition to the 200 that were in there already, I estimated that another 1,000 were being added at that time. And I guess this time we'll do the same. We're just going to estimate maybe another 1,000 being added to the original 1,200 that we had up until now out there in the outdoor worm bin. So I'm going to estimate that we're now going to be up to about 2,200 or so. Not to be trying to be overly precise or anything, but those are just the ways I estimated the values. So I'll have to get rid of this glove, I think, after this session. And as we put back our coverings here, I always like to have some sort of a rough covering, although the local critters always seem to want to, pick around and get curious about what's been added to this thing most recently. And they always seem to fold up this piece of cardboard and trash it, tear at it, whatever. But as you can see, our little hitchhiker friend that we found on here in the beginning is still here. So we're just going to let that little guy be, and we're going to take our collected worms over to my outdoor worm bin and let them free. Let's get over there. Well, I decided it was time to just get rid of those gloves, and I think I can stay relatively clean working in here. And this is my outdoor worm bin, not to be confused with my outdoor composting bin. This bin I do treat as a bin that I myself populated with worms, as opposed to the outdoor composting bin, which just seems to have spontaneously gained its worm population. Here too you can see an example of a black soldier fly that has decided that it's done eating, and it's preparing to find its place, a nice calm place to just hang out and transform into a fly. Although still active enough just to squirm around, maybe not active enough anymore to actually walk around, hard to say. But I guess this plastic probably does serve as a nice retreat for the black soldier fly larvae if they decide that it's time to pupate and transform into a fly. So out here we can see some of the material that I had placed on here last time. I think we had already finished filming. We had just released the worms into here, and then later on I came back and I scooped in a few handfuls of leafy matter, mainly because I wanted that to also sort of count as a feeding for this container. And at some point I might just start adding regular portions of food to this one too, now that it's going to have a pretty decent sized population. I decided I'm going to use a stick here to do some of our probing around, to try to keep my hands clean. Not that that's all that important, but why not, you know? So you can see here too, a lot of the material that came over with the worms last time is clearly visible in here. I did try to exclude larger chunks of things, but here you can see the base of some sort of a vegetable, and they're just making their way through that stuff. There's really not much left of it. See a lot of these peanut shells, they came through last time as well. And I guess going down even a little bit further, I had taken some cuttings off of my cucumber plants and had placed them in here in the hopes that I could treat that as a feeding a number of weeks back. And that stuff is still in here too. So I think this bin is not really, you know, desperate for food as of yet. But at some point I might just start using this as a place to compost my kitchen scraps too, in addition to my wormery downstairs. And that's the reason I want to be able to know for a fact that I've got a good number of worms in here that can do the job and do it without the food just sitting out here and spoiling. So I'm just taking this time really quickly to rummage around a little bit and explore. I believe that within a few more weeks, when the temperatures start to drop, since we're now into the autumn months, or pretty soon it'll be officially autumn, although Monday is Labor Day and that is the unofficial end of summer. I think as the temperatures begin to cool off, I think the black soldier fly activity is going to drop off, pretty much come to a complete stop, because I think that they're much more attuned to temperatures that are up in the 80s. And once you start having high temperatures that don't leave the 70s, I believe it's at that point that the black soldier flies start to drop off. And at that point, I believe this will gradually transform into not a mix of black soldier fly larvae and earthworms, but mainly earthworms. And, you know, I didn't really spot any particular concentrations of worms anywhere, because their food is scattered all about, and there aren't that many worms in here. They are kind of all over the place. But maybe at some point, if I do start coming in here with some more yummy kitchen scraps and focusing their feedings a little bit better in the future, we might be able to see concentrations of worms in a particular spot. So let's put our little probe stick aside and get our bucket of collected worms out. So this thing is almost full, as you can see. The main reason I stopped loading it, I think I was just using its capacity as sort of a measure for having an equivalent number of worms as last time. But let's go ahead and release them. And we'll use our stick to kind of break apart the pile to see if we can get a better view of how many worms we managed to bring over. Let's see what we ended up with here. Yeah, I think we've got ourselves a nice haul. Hopefully maybe another 1,000. here too, I'd love to see what the audience thinks. If you think you know, or have a, not a know, but if you think you have a hunch as to how many worms you see here, or how many we collected to release into here, then I'd love to hear it. Put your comments down below. Let's give these guys a little time to get situated. Well, I think we've pretty much given them enough time to retreat down into their new home. I mean, I don't see any. In fact, I don't even see many as I just probe down into the material here. So I'm curious to see how things progress in this bin now that we've probably got an estimated 2,000 or more worms in here. But then again, my estimates could be completely off. I have no real good way of knowing how many worms I'm dealing with. I mean, sometimes I'll put my worms on a scale if I can really clearly see that I've got almost only worms and very little other material. And then I could use that estimating method of, 1 pound of worms typically equates to about 1,000 worms, at least red wigglers. And, there's really no easy way for me to come up with that sort of a analytical estimate, so I just try to estimate by looking at their numbers. And something I did last time too, and I'm going to do again, is I'm going to treat these little guys to a portion of crushed egg shells. The crushed egg shell is what I use as grit for my worms, broken down really, really fine, as you can see here. It doesn't matter how much food you give the worms, unless you give them some grit with which to process it in their gizzards. They'll probably have a hard time consuming it unless it's really, really soft and easy for them to slurp up. But if you want them to be able to break down slightly tougher materials, then you do need to make sure they've got grit to go along with their food supply. So I'm trying to get in the habit of giving them grit every now and again, and I just have a little Ziploc here with which I can bring it outside and treat them to some here and there. And like I did last time too, I'm not sure if it was part of the video last time, but like I did last time too, I'm just grabbing a handful of loose leaves that I found piled up against the fence over here next to me, and sort of use that as a little bit of a top cover. Alright, let's get this thing out of here. And I think I'll be washing my hands anyway, even though they're not too dirty. So that's where I stand with my outdoor worm bin now. Now I actually feel like it's got the type of a population that can actually accomplish something if I start putting compostable items out here for them. And as the temperatures start to cool off, I'm sure that this will once again turn into my overwinter bin. And I'm not really trying to kill my worms, but maybe we could try to subject them to slightly more harsh conditions. Because like last winter, what I did was I took the worms, and they were actually in the this container right here. This is the container that they inhabited all winter last year, and what I did was I actually lined the inside of the container with cardboard to serve as sort of a little bit of an insulator to try to protect them a little bit from the cold weather. And once in a while I actually did take the whole thing inside to protect them from the extreme cold when I knew it was going to become extremely cold. So I don't know, maybe this year I'll subject them to the overwinter experience again, but maybe not coddle them as much and see what we get. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And I guess we'll see you back here next time. Also consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the button down there and also ring the bell. This way you'll be notified of new videos coming on my channel. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.